What if the journal you found at the library didn't just tell a story, but wrote you into it? In The Dead Man's Diary, Cassie Grant stumbles upon a dust-covered notebook written by someone who died 15 years ago. As she reads deeper, she realizes the entries are no longer about the past, they're about her. And the more she reads, the more she becomes trapped in a terrifying world of ink, mirrors, and voices beneath the floorboards. Will Cassie escape the journal's grip or become its final entry? The library was nearly silent, save for the occasional groan of old wooden shelves settling into the night and the soft rustle of pages being turned in the far corner. It was the kind of quiet that made every sound feel louder than it should have been, like the tick of the wall clock or the soft creak of a single shoe against linoleum. Cassie Grant worked the closing shift every Thursday, and though she never said it out loud, she hated being alone in that building after dark. There was something about it, an oppressive stillness that sank into your bones, as if the building itself was holding its breath. The lights flickered sometimes. The heat vents made a sigh noise that sounded too much like a person trying not to cry. And sometimes she swore she heard footsteps in the aisles when no one else was there. She told herself it was just her imagination. At 9:45 p.m., with only 15 minutes left before she could lock up and go home, Cassie was organizing a cart of returned books. She pushed it slowly between shelves, reshelving volumes in their proper places. It was when she reached the section labeled Local History that something strange caught her eye. There, wedged awkwardly between two faded volumes about town architecture, was a journal. Not a library book, a journal. Its cover was dark leather, cracked and mottled with age, and the edges were curled and stained. Dust clung to it like a second skin, untouched for years. There was no title, no label, no barcode. It didn't belong. Cassie hesitated. The logical part of her brain said it was just something a patron had misplaced, nothing more. But a deeper part, the part that had always whispered warnings when she was a child afraid of the dark, told her not to touch it. She reached out anyway. The moment her fingers brushed the leather, a low creak echoed from the end of the aisle. She froze. The lights above her buzzed faintly, then dimmed, just for a second, long enough to make her pulse throb in her ears. "Hello?" she called softly. No answer, just the soft mechanical hum of the emergency lights and the ticking of the clock. She pulled the journal from the shelf. It was heavier than it looked. The leather was cold, colder than it should have been, and as she turned it over in her hands, something inside her chest tightened. A sense of wrongness coiled around her like smoke. Cassie sat down on the nearest bench and opened the journal. The handwriting was slanted, neat but jagged at the edges, like someone trying to write calmly while their hands were shaking. The ink was dark brown, dried in uneven pools. Some pages were stained with what looked like old water damage, or something darker. She flipped to the first entry. March 2nd. They don't believe me. No one ever does. But she's real. I see her every time I look in the mirror now. Not just at night, not just when it's quiet. She's always there. standing just behind me, smiling. Cassie shivered. The words pulled her in like quicksand. She turned the page. March 4th. I tried covering all the mirrors in the house. Didn't work. She found other ways to show herself. A reflection in a window, a puddle, even the shine on a doorknob. She's not trapped in the mirror. She's trapped in me. A sudden thump made Cassie jump. It came from the second floor, the archives. She slammed the journal shut. The noise didn't repeat. The silence returned, heavier now, more alert. Cassie stood slowly, glancing toward the staircase. The rational part of her said it was the building shifting. Or maybe a bird hitting a window, but something about the sound. It hadn't been random. It had weight, intent. She put the journal on the return cart, but her eyes kept drifting back to it. Her fingers itched to open it again. Instead, she wheeled the cart to the front desk and checked the security cameras. Nothing. Every feed showed empty aisles, quiet stairwells, motionless stacks. She returned to the journal. March 9th. Last night, I woke up to whispering. I thought it was the wind, until it started saying my name. Over and over, close, like someone was crouched beside the bed. When I turned on the light, the whispering stopped, but the shape in the mirror didn't move. The air felt colder. She checked the thermostat. Still 71 degrees Fahrenheit. And yet, she could see her breath. The journal was still open in her lap when the clock struck 10. The chimes echoed through the library, hollow and mournful. As the last chime faded, something behind her whispered her name. Cassie. She spun around. Nothing. Just the aisles, the flickering lights, and the sound of her own heartbeat. She turned back to the journal. It had flipped to a different page. March 12th. I left it at the library. I thought maybe if someone else found it, she'd go after them instead. Maybe it would break the chain. Maybe it would give me peace. But I don't think she can be given away. I think she chooses. And I think she's already chosen you. The lights went out, all of them. Total darkness swallowed her. Then a sharp creak from the far end of the room, followed by slow, deliberate footsteps on tile. Cassie didn't move. She didn't breathe. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then a soft exhale inches from her ear. She screamed. The emergency lights buzzed back on. The journal was gone from her lap. She stood up fast, heart hammering, spinning in place. There, on the desk. The journal sat open, pages fluttering, as if caught in a breeze only it could feel. She backed away, staring at it. There was something new on the page. Fresh ink, still wet. March 14th. Hello, Cassie. Her blood turned to ice. The pen on the desk rolled by itself. From upstairs, the sound of a child laughing echoed down the stairwell. It was high and brittle, like a music box breaking in half. Cassie ran, out the front doors, into the parking lot, into the night. She didn't stop running until her breath came in ragged sobs, and the library was nothing more than a silhouette against the horizon. But even as she gasped for air, her mind screamed one thing over and over. She had taken it from the shelf. She had opened it, and now it had her name. Cassie didn't sleep that night. She tried. She really did. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the journal, and the ink, and her name bleeding from the page like it had been carved into flesh. Her apartment, usually a safe haven from the world, suddenly felt wrong. The hallway light flickered when she walked past it. Her bathroom mirror seemed to hum, almost imperceptibly, when she stood before it brushing her teeth. She covered it with a towel. Even her cat, Nimbus, hissed at the front door around 3 a.m., back arched, ears flat. There was nothing there, not visibly, but the hallway on the other side of that door felt occupied. By morning, Cassie looked pale, wide-eyed, and sleep-deprived. She called in sick to the library. She didn't want to go back, not after what happened. But the journal, she hadn't brought it home. It had been on the desk when she ran. And yet, as she passed the kitchen table on her way to the fridge, her eyes caught something resting on the wooden surface. The journal. It sat there like it had never moved, like it had followed her home. Cassie stopped in her tracks. Nimbus growled low from under the couch. Her heart slammed in her chest. "I didn't bring you here," she whispered. The journal remained closed, its leather cover dark and cracked, the edges still dust-streaked. She reached for it slowly. Her fingertips trembled. When she touched it, the air seemed to draw inward, as if the room had inhaled sharply. She opened it. The pages fluttered rapidly, flipping as though caught in a wind that only existed between the covers. Then they stopped. A new entry, but no date. Just 6 words, scrawled in the same jagged handwriting. "Don't look in the mirror today." Cassie slammed it shut. She backed away from the table, staring at the journal like it might leap at her. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Then, the magic began. From the hallway bathroom, the faintest tap, like a fingertip against glass. She held her breath. Tap, tap. She wasn't imagining it. The sound came again and again, rhythmically, deliberate. Cassie stepped backward, reaching for her phone, her fingers slipping against the screen. She didn't know who she was calling. 911? Her sister? The pastor she hadn't spoken to in 8 years. Then the tapping stopped. Silence. Long, heavy. And then, softly, a scrape, like a fingernail dragging slowly across the bathroom mirror. Cassie screamed. Nimbus bolted under the couch. The lights flickered. The apartment moaned around her, the groan of old pipes or something deeper, something sentient. She grabbed the journal and shoved it into a tote bag. She didn't care where it had come from anymore. She just wanted it gone. She left the apartment not bothering to change from her pajamas. Her neighbors didn't even glance at her as she fled down the stairs. The city outside was cold and gray, the sky like bruised flesh. Rain started to fall, thin and icy, soaking her hair within minutes. She didn't stop walking until she reached the library. It stood silent in the morning light, its windows blank and dark. The sign on the door said, "Closed." She didn't care. Cassie used her key. The smell hit her as soon as she stepped inside. Not the usual dusty paper scent she had come to expect, but something damp, organic, metallic, like rust or blood. She hesitated. "Just put it back," she whispered to herself. She walked through the aisles, heading for the local history section. Her sneakers squeaked against the floor, echoing too loudly in the stillness. Every footstep felt like a trespass. When she reached the shelf, she looked for the gap where the journal had been. There wasn't one. She scanned the spines. Every book was in place. No missing volumes, no out-of-place gaps, no sign the journal had ever been there. Her hands shook as she pulled the journal from her bag and placed it back on the shelf. She stepped back. Nothing happened. No whispers, no creaks, no laughter. Relief bloomed in her chest, fragile and tentative. She turned to leave, but then a whisper directly behind her. Too late. Cassie spun around. The journal was gone. In its place, wedged between two old books about the town's founding, was a photograph. She picked it up with numb fingers. It showed a girl standing in the library, this very aisle. The photo was old, faded, tinged yellow with time. The girl looked to be about Cassie's age, dressed in 90s fashion, her face wide-eyed, lips parted as if she had just heard something behind her. The date scribbled on the back, March 14th, 2008. 15 years ago, to the day. Cassie stared at it. Then she noticed the book in the girl's hands, the journal. Suddenly, the lights in the aisle flickered again. A groan came from the floorboards above her. Cassie clutched the photograph to her chest. She ran back to the front desk, back to the cameras. She pulled up the archive footage, rewound to last night. The video was there, her sitting with the journal, flipping through it. Then the lights went out. Nothing after that, just static. She fast-forwarded. Morning. The camera feed blinked. Then, there she was again, walking through the door in pajamas. But something was off. There was a figure behind her, barely visible, pale and out of focus. It followed her through the aisles. Cassie froze. Her hand clutched the mouse so tightly, her knuckles turned white. She zoomed in. The figure's face was indistinct, but its eyes, pitch black, hollow. She slammed the laptop shut. She needed answers, and she knew exactly where to look. Back in the archives, beyond the locked door. No one ever went in there unless they had to. The oldest town records were stored there. Newspapers, microfilm, death records. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The smell of mildew greeted her. The air was thick with dust. She searched for anything about March 2008. She didn't know what she was looking for. Not exactly. Just something. Anything. After nearly 30 minutes of digging, she found it. A newspaper clipping, yellowed with age, taped to the inside of a binder labeled Obituaries. March 16th, 2008. Local student Diana Holloway, 23, was found dead in the public library on March 15th. Cause of death, cardiac arrest, unexplained. Witnesses last saw her entering the building late on the 14th, reportedly carrying a leather-bound notebook. Cassie's knees nearly gave out. She had the same notebook, the same timing. She looked back at the photo in her pocket. It was Diana. Same face, same wide-eyed terror. Cassie wanted to scream, but her throat had closed. The air around her felt heavier. She heard a sound behind her. Not footsteps, not creaking. Breathing. Shallow, wet, close. She turned slowly. The light flickered once, then went out. In the pitch dark, a whisper slid across the space between them. Write your entry. Cassie ran. She didn't look back. But in her pocket, the journal pulsed with heat, and somewhere inside it, a blank page waited. Cassie didn't go home. She couldn't. Instead, she found herself walking without direction, the cold wind cutting through her sweater as the sky darkened above the city. Her shoes were soaked. Her thoughts spun like a carousel gone off track. The image of Diana Holloway's face burned in her mind, forever frozen in that photograph. Eyes wide, lips parting as if to scream. She stopped at a 24-hour diner, numb and shivering. The waitress didn't ask questions. She simply poured her a coffee and set down a menu with a tired smile. Cassie wrapped her hands around the mug, grateful for the warmth, though it did little to chase away the chill. The journal was in her bag, still. She hadn't dared look at it since she fled the archive room, but she could feel it pressing against the fabric like a heartbeat. She forced herself to eat a few bites of toast, though it tasted like paper. The diner's radio hummed softly in the background, some low instrumental tune, barely louder than a whisper. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed intermittently, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. She was halfway through her second cup when she noticed something. Across the diner, seated in a booth that should have been empty, was a woman. Long black hair, pale skin, eyes like ink. She was watching Cassie. Cassie blinked. The booth was empty. The coffee spilled from her trembling hand. The waitress rushed over with a cloth. "You okay, hun?" Cassie nodded too quickly. "Maybe you need some rest. You look like you've seen a ghost." Cassie gave a weak laugh, but inside, her stomach twisted. She didn't pay the bill. She just left cash on the table and slipped out into the growing fog that clung to the streets like something alive. She had to know more. She had to know who Diana Holloway really was, and why she was still watching. The local records office was closed, but the town university library kept digital archives, accessible through student login. Cassie wasn't a student, but she knew someone who was. Rachel Quinn, her younger cousin, journalism major, night owl, hacker in training. Cassie called her from a payphone outside a convenience store. "Hey," Rachel answered, chewing. "It's past midnight. You okay?" "I need your help." Pause. Then, more serious. "Where are you?" "By the old Texaco on 5th. Can you meet me?" 20 minutes later, Rachel's rusted Honda pulled up. She wore flannel pants and a hoodie, her laptop bag slung over one shoulder. They didn't talk much as they drove. Cassie didn't know how to explain, not without sounding insane. But Rachel didn't need much convincing. "I've seen stuff in that library too," she admitted, eyes on the road. "Heard things. Back when I was in high school. Didn't tell anyone. Thought it was just stress." Cassie stared at her. "What did you see?" Rachel didn't answer. She just drove faster. They broke into the university library through the side door. Rachel's student ID and a bent paperclip were all it took. Inside, the space felt too still. The building was too big, the silence too loud. In the computer lab, Rachel typed like her fingers were possessed. She brought up the archive records, her screen glowing in the dark room. "Diana Holloway," Cassie said. "March 2008. Anything strange?" Minutes passed. Then Rachel stopped scrolling. "This is weird," she muttered. "Look." She turned the screen. A scanned newspaper article filled the display. "Mysterious death at Public Library, still unexplained. March 17th, 2008. Despite an official ruling of cardiac arrest, questions remain surrounding the death of Diana Holloway, found alone in the local library late Friday night. Sources say Diana had been researching a series of historical disappearances tied to the library's foundation. The journal she was said to be carrying has not been found. Below the article was a grainy image, the same journal. Rachel leaned back. So it's happened before, and the disappearances Diana was looking into. She clicked through a few more links. Cass, there's more. 4 names. All people who either worked at or frequented the library between 1974 and 1996. All vanished. No bodies, no leads. One was a janitor. Another was a student. 2 were patrons. Cassie's mouth went dry. Do any of them have a journal in common? Rachel shook her head. Not mentioned, but get this. Every one of them had checked out books from the same aisle, local history. Cassie's stomach turned. She looked at her bag. The journal hadn't moved, but it felt closer now. She opened it. New entry. No date, no handwriting. Just a photograph taped to the page. It showed the university library. Tonight. Through the window, and in the reflection of the glass, Cassie, with a figure standing behind her, hair like oil, eyes black and endless. Rachel hesitated. Are you sure? I'm not letting it write my name again. They left the library fast. Outside, the fog had thickened. The air was too still. The streetlights buzzed faintly. They drove out of town to the edge of the woods where Rachel used to go camping. Cassie dug a hole with her bare hands, dirt cold and wet, clinging to her fingernails. They dropped the journal in. Cassie poured lighter fluid over it, struck a match. The flame danced, then died. Again, another match, another flicker. Then, gone. Cassie tried again and again, her hands shaking, the cold seeping into her bones. The journal wouldn't burn. Rachel paled. That's not possible. A sound came from the trees, not wind, not animals, whispering. Dozens of voices, waiting. When she woke, her phone buzzed with a message. From a number she didn't recognize. One word. Hello. She didn't respond, but when she turned to grab her sweater from the chair, the journal was sitting beneath it, covered in dirt, and open to a blank page. Cassie stood frozen in Rachel's apartment, staring at the dirt-caked journal resting on the chair. The same journal they had buried hours earlier. Its cracked leather surface was still damp with earth, small clumps of soil falling onto the hardwood floor. The air around it felt colder, tighter, like the oxygen had thickened. Rachel emerged from the kitchen, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She stopped when she saw Cassie's expression. What's wrong? Cassie pointed. It came back. Rachel's eyes followed her finger, and the mugs trembled in her grip. No, Rachel whispered. That's not possible. I saw you bury it. I helped. The journal lay open to a new page. No date. Just a line of text written in that now familiar jagged script. You are part of the story now. Cassie turned to Rachel, her voice dry. It won't let me go. Rachel put the mugs down carefully, like any sudden movement might wake something. We have to figure out what it wants. I think it already told me. Cassie's eyes stayed locked on the ink. It wants me to write. Rachel backed away. You're not doing that. I might not have a choice. There was a sound, very faint, like pages turning by themselves, from nowhere and everywhere. The journal closed on its own. Cassie's skin crawled. She sat down slowly, her hands trembling as she opened the journal again. The next page was blank, but the pen lay beside it, its tip wet, as if someone had just been writing. She picked it up. The air seemed to press against her chest. She didn't want to write. Every fiber in her body told her not to, but her hand moved anyway. My name is Cassie Grant, she wrote, and this is how it began. The ink soaked into the page unnaturally slow. Like it didn't want to dry. It shimmered, faintly, and as it did, the room changed. The walls darkened. The light bulbs flickered, then buzzed out, plunging everything into a shadowy twilight. Cassie looked up. Rachel was gone. Rachel? Her voice cracked. No answer. She stood up, heart pounding, journal still in hand. She called again, louder. Rachel! Still nothing. From the far corner of the room, a whisper, not Rachel's voice, a chorus of voices, low, wet, whispering in unison. Write more. Cassie backed toward the door, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The journal pulsed in her hands. It felt alive. She dropped it. It hit the ground with a wet sound, like flesh on tile. The whispers stopped. The lights came back on. Rachel stood in the kitchen, staring at her. Where did you go? Cassie asked. Rachel frowned. I've been here the whole time. You sat down, you didn't move, you didn't speak. Cassie looked at the clock. 37 minutes had passed. She hadn't written more than one sentence, but the journal had new pages filled in. She flipped through them, each page dense with her own handwriting. But I didn't write this, she said out loud. Rachel looked over her shoulder. The entries detailed things Cassie hadn't said, things she hadn't done. But the writing was hers. Every loop, every slant. One page described the sound of males tapping glass just before sleep. Another spoke of waking to find muddy footprints across the floor. Footprints leading to her bed. Cassie's breath caught. That had happened last week. She thought it was Nimbus, her cat. But she hadn't told anyone. Rachel read faster, then stopped suddenly. Cassie, look! She pointed to a sentence. Rachel will bleed before the end. Silence fell between them. Neither spoke, neither breathed. The journal turned another page by itself, and now there was a sketch, a charcoal drawing of Rachel, eyes wide, blood pouring from her ears, a shadow behind her, its face a smear of black. Cassie slammed the journal shut. We're done with this. Rachel shook her head. I don't think it wants you to stop. It's writing you now. Cassie stared at the bag. We have to go back to where it started. Rachel blinked. The library? No, before that. The town archives. If Diana was researching disappearances, maybe there's something deeper, something older. It was nearly 3 a.m. when they arrived. The archives building stood squat and unassuming. Tucked behind the courthouse, Rachel's ID wouldn't help here. They pried open a ground floor window and climbed in. Inside, it smelled like rot, old paper, dampness, something metallic. Cassie's flashlight swept across rows of cabinets and boxes. Dust danced in the beam. They searched in silence. It was Rachel who found the file. It was thin, misfiled, tucked in a folder labeled Maintenance Reports 1920, 1940. Inside was a single sheet, yellowed, typewritten. March 3rd, 1934. Staff report a strange book appearing in the reading room. Descriptions vary. Leather-bound, no catalog entry. Attempts to remove it fail. Burns when touched. One staff member, Marjorie Lee, attempted to destroy it. She vanished 2 nights later. Cassie's throat closed. Rachel whispered, "It's been here for almost 100 years." There was more, a handwritten note attached at the bottom. "The book writes the reader. If you see your name, it's already too late." Cassie dropped the file. Something moved in the dark behind them. Not footsteps, dragging, like something heavy pulled across stone. The flashlight flickered. Rachel turned to run. The door slammed shut. Cassie grabbed her cousin's hand. "Move!" They ran down the narrow hallways, past rows of silent records, their footsteps slapping against the cracked tile. The dragging followed, closer. Then a whisper, low, sweet, inside Cassie's head. "Write or bleed. Choose." She didn't answer. She kicked open the window they'd climbed through, helped Rachel through, climbed out herself. They didn't stop running until the courthouse clock struck 4. In the parking lot, they stood gasping, lungs burning, hands scraped and dirty. The journal was still in Cassie's bag. When she opened it, her hand was already moving. Writing, writing. She made it out, but Rachel wouldn't. Cassie dropped the pen, but the ink kept flowing, letter after letter, word after word. Written by no hand, Rachel stared in horror, and behind her, in the glass of the car window, a face, watching, smiling, waiting. The next morning, sunlight poured weakly through the windows of Rachel's apartment, but it didn't feel like morning. It didn't feel like anything had changed. The air still felt thick, heavy, too quiet. Cassie sat on the couch, unmoving, staring at the journal lying on the coffee table. It hadn't opened again. Not yet. Rachel paced behind her, biting her thumbnail, glancing out the window every few seconds like she expected something, someone, to appear on the street. Neither of them had spoken since they escaped the archives. There were no words left that made sense. What do you say when the ink inside a book writes the future? When you're not even sure whose hands are yours anymore? Cassie finally broke the silence. "We need to go back." Rachel stopped pacing. "Back, Cass, no! We almost died last night." "I know," Cassie whispered, "but we missed something. It started earlier than Diana, earlier than 1934 even. That journal didn't just appear in the library. It came from somewhere." Rachel sat down across from her, her voice low. What if it doesn't matter where it came from? What if the only thing that matters is what it wants now? Cassie didn't answer. She reached out and touched the journal's cover. It was warm, not like something basking in the sun, warm like flesh. Cassie flinched back. Rachel didn't seem surprised. "It wants you to open it," she said. "I know. You shouldn't. I know." Cassie opened it. The ink glistened on the newest page, the script wet and too perfect. You can't burn what was never born. You can't bury what was never alive. You can only feed it. Below the words, a list of names had begun to appear, each letter forming slowly as if someone were carving them into the paper from inside. Diana Holloway, Marjorie Lee, Jonathan K. Ross, Edith Templar, Samuel Dre, Rachel Quinn. Rachel saw it too. "No," she said. "No, no, no. I'm not dying. I'm not letting it win." Cassie touched her cousin's hand. "We're going to find a way." Rachel's breath hitched. "It wrote my name." "We'll erase it." "How?" Cassie didn't know. But the library, the real library, the foundation, the sublevels, there were whispers among the oldest staff that there used to be floors beneath the current basement, sealed off decades ago during renovations. Some said it was just storage. Others said it was something else, something buried. "I need to go under the library," Cassie said. Rachel stared at her. "You're serious?" Cassie nodded. "I think the journal came from there. The voices, the dreams. I keep hearing them from under the floorboards, like something's trapped, waiting." Rachel hesitated, then stood. "If you go, I go." They waited until nightfall. Cassie knew the back way in. She'd used it before, during storm closings and power outages. They entered through the fire exit behind the maintenance building. The halls inside were darker than she remembered, colder, and even though the power was still on, the emergency lights flickered, as if the building itself was trying to warn them away. The elevator didn't go low enough. They had to take the stairs to the sub-basement. A rusted access door at the bottom hadn't been opened in years. Cassie found the key taped behind a breaker box. They stepped into the dark. The air changed immediately, thicker, damper, the smell of wet stone and something older than mildew. They walked carefully, their flashlights casting long shadows against brick walls. The silence was deep, broken only by the occasional drip of water and the distant groan of the foundation above them. Then the whispers began, soft, impossible to understand. Cassie slowed her steps. "Do you hear that?" she asked. Rachel nodded. "It's saying your name." They reached a corridor that ended in a metal door. The plaque above it had been blacked out. Cassie ran her hand across it. Letters scratched beneath the soot. "Records Storage, 1894. Cassie pushed the door open. Inside was a wide circular room. Shelves collapsed long ago lined the walls. Papers were strewn everywhere. And in the center of the room was a hole, a perfect square hole in the floor, as if a piece of the building had been neatly removed. Cassie stepped closer, her light sweeping the edges. The journal was there, at the bottom. Cassie gasped. "No, that's not possible. It's upstairs. I brought it with me." Rachel opened her backpack. Empty. The journal was gone. It had returned to where it began. Cassie knelt near the hole. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. Then a sound from below, a scratching like nails against stone. Something was climbing up. "No," Rachel said. "Cassie, we have to leave. Now." Cassie couldn't move. She stared as pale, thin fingers emerged from the darkness. Too many fingers. Rachel grabbed her. "We need to go." Cassie turned to run. The whispers screamed. Lights exploded overhead. The building shuddered. They fled through the halls as the foundation moaned behind them. The door they'd entered through slammed shut. Dust fell from the ceiling. Pipes groaned and burst. Somewhere behind them, the whispers rose to a shriek, a single word, echoing down the corridor. Right. Cassie stumbled through the stairwell, gasping, dragging Rachel with her. They burst into the upper floors just as the emergency sprinklers engaged. Cold water fell like rain. Steam rose from their clothes, from the walls, from nowhere. They escaped into the street, and behind them, deep underground, a heartbeat. Cassie knew it. It was awake now, and it was hungry. Back at the apartment, she found the journal lying on her pillow, dry, pristine. As if it had never left her side, she opened it. The page was blank, waiting, and beneath it, faintly scratched into the paper, a sound, a recorded sound. Cassie didn't know how, but the page made noise. Low, wet, breathing. She closed the journal, her hands shaking. Rachel stared at her. What now? Cassie looked out the window. The city didn't know. The world didn't care. But under their feet, something had begun, and they had written the first words. There was no stopping it now. Dot. Cassie hadn't slept in 2 days. She didn't trust what might happen when her eyes closed. The journal never stopped whispering, even when shut tight and stuffed beneath blankets, even when hidden in a locked drawer. Its voice was there, in her thoughts, in her dreams, in the flickering static between the channels of her mind. Rachel had stopped talking, not because she refused, but because she couldn't. Ever since the night at the sub-basement, her voice had gone, stolen. Her throat was fine, no physical damage, no swelling. The doctors found nothing, but her words were gone, like something had reached into her and taken them. Cassie knew what it was. The journal had warned her. Rachel would bleed before the end. And now, maybe that bleeding was inside. Cassie sat on the floor of her apartment, back against the wall, the journal open in her lap. She didn't remember opening it, but it was always open now, always writing. Today it had only one line on the page. Find the mirror. The old one. Aisle 7. You've seen her there before. She's waiting. Cassie didn't want to go back to the library. Every time she thought of those shelves, her stomach knotted. But the whispers wouldn't let up. The floor creaked under her feet, like something moved just beneath the boards. The light bulbs flickered in slow, rhythmic patterns. Even Nimbus, her cat, had disappeared, vanished without a sound. The library was the only place that made sense anymore. Or maybe it was the only place where the madness could be contained. She stood, brushed the sleep from her eyes, and packed the journal in a canvas tote bag. It squirmed slightly, as if the pages were breathing. Rachel watched her from the couch, eyes hollow. Cassie paused at the door. I'll be back. Rachel nodded, then scribbled something on a pad. Don't trust the reflections. Cassie left without responding. She arrived at the library as the sun began to dip behind gray clouds. A storm was rolling in. She could feel it. The air smelled like metal, like rain and electricity. Inside, the building felt deserted, but not empty. Her shoes squeaked on the tile as she passed rows of forgotten shelves. The security lights were on, faint and humming. The air was cold, too cold for a spring afternoon. She walked to aisle 7, local history, where it had all started. The mirror was there, just like the journal said. It stood tall between 2 bookshelves, an antique full-length mirror, frame carved in intricate swirls that looked like twisted branches. Cassie didn't remember seeing it before, but it felt familiar, like it had always been there. The surface of the glass was flawless, too flawless. It didn't reflect the flickering light overhead. It reflected only Cassie and something behind her. She turned. Nothing. She turned back to the mirror. Her reflection remained, but behind it, in the glass, a figure stood, a woman, barefoot, pale. Her hair hung like wet strings across her face. Her mouth stretched too wide in a grin that looked carved, not grown. Her eyes were black pits. Cassie stumbled back, her breath catching. The figure didn't move, not even when Cassie did. It stood there, just behind her reflection, watching. The journal pulsed in her bag. She pulled it out. It had opened again. The ink shimmered on the page. She lives inside the mirror. She's the first. She's the reason. Write her name and set her free. Cassie didn't know the name, but the mirror did. She stepped forward, closer. The reflection darkened. The lights overhead buzzed. Somewhere far away, thunder rolled. Cassie placed her hand against the glass. It was warm. A vibration passed through her fingers. A whisper entered her ear. Not heard, but felt. Marjorie, the name. Marjorie Lee, the staff member from 1934. Cassie opened the journal, turned to the last blank page, and wrote the name. Marjorie Lee. The ink bled into the page like it was being devoured. A crack shot across the mirror. Then another. Cassie backed away as the glass spiderwebbed. The surface bulged, pulsed, and then the mirror shattered. Not exploded, shattered inward, as if something had finally been released. The lights went out. Darkness swallowed everything. And from the broken glass, a sound emerged. Not a scream, a breath. A long, relieved breath. Then footsteps, bare, wet, slapping against tile. Cassie tried to move, but her legs refused. She could hear her own heartbeat. And something else, moving closer, closer. A hand touched her shoulder. Cold, wrong. A whisper slid into her ear, like smoke curling against her skin. Thank you. The lights snapped back on. Cassie was alone. The mirror was gone. Only shards remained. She looked at the journal. The page was gone, ripped clean from the spine. In its place, a new page had formed. Written in a different hand, neater, feminine. I am Marjorie, and I remember. I remember the dark beneath the floor. I remember the voices. I remember the writing. I remember who started it. Cassie ran her fingers down the page. At the bottom, another line. There was a man. He brought the first journal. He wrote in blood. Find him. Cassie closed the book. The library remained quiet. But from the far end of the hallway, she heard the creak of floorboards. And then, laughter. A soft, dry chuckle. It echoed once, then was gone. Cassie didn't go straight home after the mirror. She couldn't. Her hands were still trembling, her mind clouded by the weight of what she'd just released. Marjorie Lee, a name whispered through time, through ink, through broken glass. Cassie had written it, freed her, or something that wore her face. Now the journal whispered differently, not in commands, in hunger. Each step Cassie took outside the library was followed by an echo, not her own. It was like something moved just behind her, never closer, never farther, just there, waiting. She stopped at a gas station and stood in the bathroom under cold, flickering light, staring into the mirror. Her reflection blinked when she did, moved when she did. But the eyes felt wrong, slightly off-center, watching something just past her shoulder. She splashed water on her face and left before the mirror changed its mind. Rachel didn't answer the door when she returned. The lights were on. Her laptop was open. Music played softly from her speakers. An old lullaby Cassie didn't recognize, the melody off-key, almost warped. The notes stretched like whispers in a dream. Cassie called again. Rachel? She found her in the bedroom, curled under the covers, still. Cassie rushed to her side. Rachel! Hey, wake up! Rachel's eyes snapped open. They were bloodshot, wide, not with fear, but something colder. Resignation. She opened her mouth and let out a sound. A dry rasp. A breath that turned into a sob. She held up her phone and typed with shaking fingers. He's writing now. The man from the page. Cassie's chest tightened. Marjorie said something about him. Said he brought the first journal. Rachel typed again. He's been writing names. Not with ink, not with pen, with blood. Cassie sat back, the chill crawling across her spine. The journal lay on the table beside the bed, closed, quiet. She reached for it, then paused. A faint red smear stained its leather cover. She opened it slowly. The pages were soaked through, not with ink, but with something darker. Dark red, thick, congealed in the edges of the spine. There was no text on the pages, only names, not written, etched, carved into the paper with something sharp. The first name, Diana Holloway. Below it, Marjorie Lee. And then, others. Names Cassie had never seen before. Elliot Gray, Sylvia Monroe, James Hartwell, Amara Ness, Rachel Quinn, and finally, Cassie Grant. The last name. Cassie dropped the journal and staggered backward. Rachel sat up, grabbing her phone. It's a ledger. He's keeping score. Every name is a life, a sacrifice. Cassie's voice broke. Who is he? Rachel shook her head and typed again. I don't know, but I saw him. In the mirror, in my dreams. He has no face, just pages. Torn pages, stitched where skin should be. Cassie stared at the journal. We have to find him before he writes again. Rachel pointed to the wall where her investigation board had once been. Most of it had been torn down after the basement incident, but a few pins remained. A yellowed newspaper clipping caught Cassie's eye. Loco Triste vanishes after burning banned book. The article was dated 1962. It mentioned a man named Father Malcolm Gray. Cassie's breath caught. Wait, one of the names in the journal, Elliot Gray. Maybe related? Rachel nodded, typed quickly. Go to the church archives. It's in Westbridge, 40 minutes from here. They kept his journals. Cassie grabbed her coat. Come with me. Rachel shook her head. Typed. He's watching me. If I move, he'll write again. Cassie hesitated, then nodded once. She left the apartment with the journal wrapped in a scarf, buried deep in her tote bag. The storm had begun now, rain coming in sharp slants, wind howling down the streets. Her car struggled to see through the downpour. The wipers moved like they were panicking. She arrived at St. Jude's Archive House at 11:23 p.m. The door was open, not unlocked, open. Cassie stepped inside. The smell of dust and candle wax filled her lungs. The light was dim. A single hallway stretched before her, lined with rooms that had no labels, only faded wooden doors. She followed the sound, dripping. Not water, something thicker. It led her to a locked metal gate at the bottom of a narrow staircase. Beyond it, a room filled with shelves, scrolls, boxes. Cassie picked the lock with a library card and a piece of wire. The door groaned open, crying out like it hadn't been touched in decades. Inside, everything smelled of rot and iron. In the far corner of the room, beneath a flickering oil lamp, sat a large tome. Not the journal, a ledger. She opened it. The pages were stained red. Each one had a name. Next to each name, a method. Sylvia Monroe, drowned in ink. James Hartwell, fed to mirrors. Amara Ness, erased by silence. The last page had no names, only a sketch. A figure cloaked in shadows, its body covered in stitched parchment. Ink poured from its fingertips. Below the image, a line of script different from the rest. He was the first writer, but he never stopped. He became the story. Cassie heard something behind her, a breath. Then, pages turning. She turned around. No one. But the journal in her bag had opened itself. A single word pulsed on the page. Run. Cassie didn't wait. She bolted up the stairs. The shelves behind her fell like dominoes, crashing to the floor. From the darkness below, something rose. It didn't walk. It glided. A soft rustling filled the stairwell, paper against paper, like dry leaves in the wind. Cassie reached the door and slammed it shut just as the shadow reached the top step. She didn't stop running until she was inside her car, the rain hammering the windshield like fingers. The journal sat on the passenger seat, dripping. She drove through the storm without looking back. She didn't need to. She could still hear it, rustling, turning, writing. The rain didn't stop. Cassie drove through it, windshield wipers struggling against the sheets of water that blurred everything into shadow. Streetlights smeared like streaks of fire across the glass. Every sound in the car, the tires, the engine, even the beat of the wipers, seemed distant, muffled, as if the world had been pushed 1 inch too far from reality. The journal sat beside her on the passenger seat. It hadn't moved, not since the church, but Cassie felt it, watching, breathing, waiting for her to open it again. She refused. She gripped the wheel harder, her knuckles white, her eyes locked on the slick road ahead. The storm howled around her, wind pushing against the car like unseen hands. She passed the city limit without noticing. Something was calling her, not with words, with gravity, pulling. She didn't realize where she was going until she saw the sign. Greystone Mental Hospital, condemned property, no trespassing. Cassie slowed to a stop on the overgrown drive. The building loomed in the darkness, its silhouette jagged against the sky. Windows like empty sockets. Half the roof had collapsed. Vines strangled the brick. Time had eaten this place. And yet, the front door was open, just slightly. Cassie stepped out into the rain. She didn't know why she had come here. She only knew the name, Greystone, written faintly on the edge of one torn journal page. She entered without knocking. Inside, the air was thick, damp, heavy with rot. The floors creaked under her boots. Water dripped from the ceiling somewhere in the distance. The smell of mold was strong, but underneath it, something else. Ink, fresh. She moved through the corridor slowly, flashlight casting long shadows on peeling walls. Graffiti covered everything, most of it meaningless, except one word, carved repeatedly along the hallway. Right. She reached what used to be the main records room. It looked like a tornado had passed through. Cabinets overturned, folders shredded, paper everywhere. But at the center of the chaos, untouched, sat a single desk. On it, a thick volume, not the journal, but something older, a ledger, covered in cracked black leather. Her hands moved before her mind could protest. She opened it. The pages were made of skin, not paper, skin, etched with names. Each line was written in dried blood, some darker than others, some smeared. The ink shimmered. Alive. Cassie turned one page, then another. On the third page, her own name, Cassie Grant, entry pending. A sound echoed above her, scraping, like claws across plaster. Then, laughter, low, guttural. Cassie turned off the flashlight, waited, listened. A breath moved across the back of her neck. She spun around. No one. She looked back at the book. It had changed. The page where her name had been was gone, torn cleanly from the spine. The pages around it trembled, then began to tear themselves, one by one. Rip, rip, rip. Cassie backed away as each page was destroyed, the pieces flying upward as if pulled by invisible strings. The torn fragments hovered in the air and began to reassemble, not back into a book, into a shape, a figure. Cassie stumbled and fell, her flashlight clattering across the floor. The figure twisted in the air, pages folding and crumpling, forming limbs, a torso, a face. Its eyes were blank parchment, its mouth a line of torn calligraphy. The voice that came from it wasn't spoken. It was written, scraped across the walls in real time. You read, you wrote, now bleed. Cassie grabbed the flashlight and ran. The halls blurred past her. The whispers followed. Pages swirled in the air like insects. The figure gave chase, gliding soundlessly, the rustling of its form the only clue to its speed. She reached the exit, but the door slammed shut in front of her. She turned. It was there, The figure towered above her, its head tilted. It extended a hand. The fingers were quills, each one dripping ink or blood. Cassie screamed and threw the flashlight. The beam burst in its face. For a moment, it convulsed. The pages tore apart. Cassie used the moment to dive through a side door, slamming it behind her. She found herself in a dark stairwell. She ran downward, deeper, until the steps ended in a locked door. She kicked once, twice. It cracked open. Behind it, a storage room filled with more journals. Hundreds, thousands, all identical, each with a name, each with a story, each waiting to be written. Cassie stared in horror. Some of the books were open, and they were bleeding. She turned to leave. The door slammed shut. A voice whispered from the shelves. 12 voices, 100. "Right!" Cassie screamed. She clawed at the walls, found a journal with her name burned into the cover. She opened it. Inside, a mirror, small, shard-like. She saw herself, but not herself. Eyes black, mouth stretched, smiling. The figure from the pages had become her reflection. She dropped the book. The mirror cracked. The pages stopped tearing. Everything went still. Then a single page floated down from the ceiling. It landed at her feet, written in her handwriting. I broke it, but I didn't stop it. Cassie closed her eyes. The silence thickened. Then footsteps above, real, heavy. She opened the door and climbed back into the world. The storm had passed, but the air was wrong. Too quiet, too clean. Back in her car, the original journal lay untouched, but inside it, a new name. Rachel Quinn. Final entry pending. Cassie looked up at the road. She was no longer being hunted. She was being tested. And someone was next. Cassie drove with both hands clenched tight on the steering wheel, the city behind her now a blur of drowned light and broken whispers. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the sky had lightened into a sickly gray, as if even morning no longer dared to shine properly. Every street she passed felt deserted. Every shadow watched her. Rachel's name. The journal had written it again. Final entry pending. Cassie had seen that phrase before, in the ledger at Greystone. The moment before a name was claimed, the moment the ink turned to blood. Rachel had been silent for days now, still trapped in her apartment, trapped with something neither of them could see. She hadn't bled yet, but the journal never lied. Cassie had one thought, one idea that clung to the edge of her mind like frost. What if she could take Rachel's name out? What if she could unwrite it? The journal had been writing them. Maybe she could write back. Cassie pulled into the alley behind the library. Her hands shook as she turned off the engine. She had come here before dawn for a reason. No witnesses. No one to stop her from doing what had to be done. She carried the journal under her coat and slipped through the side entrance. The building was colder than it had ever been. Inside, every breath turned to fog. Every light flickered like a dying heartbeat. And from somewhere in the dark came the sound of tearing paper. She didn't speak. She walked. Aisle 7 waited. But this time, the mirror was gone. In its place stood something worse. a wall of reflections. Not one surface, dozens. Mirrors layered over each other like shards glued into a shrine. Each one held a version of her, some normal, some not. One reflection was smiling when she wasn't. Another had eyes that bled like ink. And one stared at her with its head slowly tilting, a pen in its hand, and blood on its collar. Cassie dropped the journal on the floor in front of the mirrors. She knelt beside it, opened to a blank page. It pulsed beneath her fingers, waiting. She pulled a pen from her coat pocket and held it over the paper. "Let me in," she whispered. A reflection blinked, but not her own. She wrote the words carefully. Remove Rachel Quinn. Remove her fate. Rewrite her ending. The pen stuttered. The journal trembled. Then the ink vanished, swallowed by the page. Cassie waited. Nothing happened. Then she turned the page. A new entry had appeared. Not written in her hand, written in the journals. "I saw you coming. I saw you writing. I saw your breath before you exhaled. You cannot erase a name without replacing it." Beneath the text, a photograph of her, lying on the floor of the library, eyes wide open, mouth slack, blood pooling from beneath her. A pen still clutched in her fingers. She screamed and slammed the journal shut. All the mirrors shattered at once. Glass flew through the air, slicing her cheek. She fell backward, hands over her head. Footsteps approached, slow, measured, bare feet. Cassie crawled backward along the floor, past broken shards, the journal pulsing like a heart beside her. From the shadows stepped a figure, not faceless, but wearing her face, her exact face, every detail, except the eyes. The eyes were ink. They dripped slowly down her cheeks. The figure crouched beside her and tilted its head. "You wrote her free," it said, in a voice that trembled like static. "Now who writes you?" Cassie couldn't move. The figure reached out with one hand and gently pressed a torn page to her chest. It was still warm, still wet. She looked down. Her name, carved in black-red ink, Cassie Grant. Final entry. Confirmed. She screamed again, but the library swallowed the sound. The floor fell away, not physically, but in her mind. She was falling, falling through shelves of names, endless journals, thousands of lives, each one written, each one ending. She landed in darkness, and there, sitting in front of her, was a boy, 12 years old, smiling, holding a quill. He dipped it in blood. "I'm the first," he said softly. "I wrote the names. I wrote the mirrors. I wrote the walls and the voices and the stairs. I wrote your fear." Cassie stared at him. "You can stop," she whispered. He laughed, a child's laugh, too bright, too clean. "I can't," he said, "because you keep reading." The journal lay on the cold marble floor of the library, wide open, ink still glistening on its final page. But Cassie was no longer moving. She wasn't dead. Not yet. Her eyes blinked slowly, body curled against the shattered mirror wall, a smear of blood drying across her cheek. Her breath came shallow, each one hurt. Somewhere behind her eyelids, the world twisted. She was still inside the library, but not the one above, not the one built of brick and wood. This one had no walls, no ceiling, no time. It was endless. Shelves rose into the dark like dead trees. The books groaned. The floor creaked like old lungs. She was inside the archive beneath the archive, the place where the stories finished. Cassie stood slowly. The pain in her chest was dull now, as if her nerves had grown tired of screaming. In front of her stood a single desk. On it, one book, closed, wrapped in chains, and a note written in her own hand, "Do not open." She reached for it anyway. The second her fingers brushed the cover, the room shifted. Walls folded like paper, the shelves screamed, and behind her the boy appeared again. 12 years old, ink-stained eyes, smiling. "You came back," he said. Cassie didn't answer. She opened the book. Inside, nothing. No names, no pages. Only a mirror. Not glass. Ink. A black surface that shimmered like oil. She leaned closer. Her reflection stared back, then smiled. But she hadn't smiled. The reflection moved its lips. Cassie leaned in. "What?" she whispered. The reflection said, "You never wrote this." The journal slammed shut. Cassie screamed. The shelves exploded out. Words formed on the walls as she passed. "Your ending is not yours. Your name was borrowed. You were written too." She stopped, collapsed against a door that hadn't been there before. The handle was ink. She touched it. It dissolved. The door swung open, and she stepped through. Back into her apartment. Back into the real world. Rachel sat on the couch, alive, eyes wide, holding the journal. She looked up, relief flooding her face. "You're back." Cassie nodded. Everything felt heavier, like the world had gained weight. She walked forward. Her legs were numb. Rachel stood, grabbing her arm. "You're bleeding." Cassie looked down. Her arm was soaked, but it wasn't her blood. She pulled back her sleeve. A line of ink ran beneath her skin, letters forming. She tore at the skin with trembling fingers. Underneath, words written across her veins. She grabbed the journal from Rachel and opened it. The last page had a title, "The Dead Man's Diary," written by Cassie Grant. And beneath it, a single line, "Final entry by unknown." She flicked back, through pages of madness, through names, through ink, until she found the beginning, the first line, the one that started everything. "This journal belongs to." It wasn't her name. It wasn't anyone's. It was empty, still, waiting. She stared at the blank line. Then the pen floated up from the desk. Rachel backed away, her hands shaking. "Don't," she whispered. Cassie couldn't stop herself. Her fingers closed around the pen. She pressed it to the page. The pen didn't move, but the page did. Words wrote themselves. "This journal belongs to the reader." Cassie dropped the pen, looked around, looked at Rachel. The apartment shifted, not visibly, but the sound changed. The hum of the lights grew louder. The ticking of the clock slowed, and behind Rachel, the mirror over the bookshelf began to ripple. Cassie stepped back. "No, no, no, no." Rachel turned, saw the reflection, screamed. The mirror shattered. A figure stepped out. Cassie's shape, but her eyes were ink, her smile inhuman. She stepped forward, looked at Cassie, then past her, to you, to whoever is reading this now. And she smiled wider, because the final entry wasn't hers. And now it's yours.